You ready? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast. I'm your host, Chris Beesley, well, nominally today, just myself and my colleague, Echoes Everton correspondent, Joe Thomas, joining me. We were both at Goodison Park on Saturday for the game against Bournemouth, which ultimately proved to be the final FA Cup tie, or indeed any cup tie, at the stadium. I mean, we all predicted a win, didn't we, Joe, on Friday? I think thoughts were positive, but after three consecutive Premier League victories, the Blues brought back down to earth again by the Cherries.
Yeah, we all knew it was going to be tough, and I think that when we predicted a win, hopefully it came clear during the podcast. Obviously, we're all getting a little bit not ahead of ourselves, but I think we were all part of the emotion and that was going to be Goodison and the cup and the storylines that could unfold this season. A cup run for Everton this year, there were so many amazing narratives there, weren't there, that were available to him, and it's hard not to get swept up in that a little bit. But really disappointed for what's happened. I kind of, Bournemouth are a very good side, and they deserve to win. Given where they are and how well suited they are to play in Everton, it seems Everton could easily have played very, very well and still come out second best in that game. But to come away out the cup and to have done so largely through self-inflicted errors, I think, particularly in the first half, just really frustrating. I was really disappointed on Saturday night. I still am a bit disappointed, to be honest. I don't know about you, Chris.
Yeah. Well, a preemptive strike here from Terry Dactyl's getting the quips in early. He says the podcast is later than a Tarkowski tackle, but we like to build up that anticipation for you. But I'm very disappointed. We know, like as Joe said, that Bournemouth is going to have danger of quoting Sean Dyche. Even David Moyes has quoted Sean Dyche when he was talking about players on the grass. But I was going to say that Bournemouth are a top outfit. But this season, they are an accomplished side. And unfortunately now that's a hat-trick of victories against Everton. What was disappointing was the way Everton shot themselves in the foot. I mean, the way it was unforced errors. Obviously, the tackle for the penalty, and then James Tarkowski giving the ball away cheaply for a second goal, and that left Everton with a mountain to climb. And there's been such anticipation going into this game. The incredible work by the 1878s again with all those FA Cup banners honouring Everton's FA Cup winners of yesteryear. But there's a fan base there. There's a whole generation of Evertonians who've grown up without those memories, without those magic moments, and they don't want, as much as they love and they appreciate and respect that past, it's about making new memories. And this was an opportunity to go, going ahead of ourselves and saying Everton win the cup, but at least get into the last 16 there. A lot of big teams have been knocked out now, and there is a bit of a pathway there. So, yeah, it did feel flat, and it did feel like a real disappointment after all those years at Goodison Park that the FA Cup story ends in that manner.
Yeah, great opportunity to make new memories in the old stadium, isn't it? I think that was it. Yeah, the park end looked amazing with all of the flags, and I tried taking a photo, but from the press seats, I got a stanchion right in front of me, so like it's would just look like a first-person portrait of a post, unfortunately. But it did look great. It was brilliant. For those of us that haven't seen yet, the 1878 looks like we're going to have a coach welcome for the final derby on Wednesday, which will add to the emotion of that occasion and be something to really, really look forward to as well. But yeah, it did, and this is kind of what we were talking about on Friday. This felt like a hurdle that, whilst it would be tough, was surmountable, and if Everton could get over it, there was a pathway through to Wembley. Obviously, Wembley being the semi-finals onwards, whether it had got further, we'd have had to wait and see. But normally, there's a pathway for someone to have a better run to the final stage. As you look at it now, and we know that Liverpool are out, Chelsea are out, Arsenal are out. There's some Spurs are out. Some big sides that have been knocked out there. A lot of Football League sides through to the latter stages, and that draw could have just opened up for Everton. It just would have been such a nice time. You do feel that Manchester City are left into it, but it does look like this might be the year that it opens up for someone that isn't a perennial winner of the trophy. And it's just a real shame that, and I know, look, Moyes is obviously right that the Premier League is the priority, and I think this was a reminder of why he is still operating and speaking with caution despite the recent results. We saw Everton's limitations on show in 4D the other day, and maybe, I mean, I'm not going to say it was a good thing to just have that reminder, because it wasn't. I want Everton to still be in the cup, but it might have been a valuable lesson to everyone, just to to remind that this is still going to be a bit of a battle this season, or still could be. But yeah, I mean, we'll get into the meat of the game, I'm sure, now. But just from an overview, I can't help but be a bit frustrated, a bit disappointed. It was always going to be tough, but it does feel a real shame once again that Everton won't be in the last stage of this brilliant old trophy.
Yeah, I mean, you say your final gambit there, the brilliant old trophy. Just before we do go into the meat in the game, as you say, but don't we know Liverpool are out? We've had quite the debate about that in the office this morning. But I thought it was a really good point by Chris Bascom of the Daily Telegraph. It's something I'd be wholeheartedly getting behind. Obviously after every Everton fixture, we do the national paper review and what national journalists, and then obviously what Joe's put in his echo verdict as well, the different thoughts about the game. And it was a really well-argued piece, I thought, in the Telegraph from Chris Bascom. It's included in our echo piece. If you've not obviously got the subscription for the Telegraph, just a succinct version of that. But the point he makes is, in giving that respect to the FA Cup, it is, the oldest football competition in the world, and it's not what it was, but it can get back to that glory game it's been in the past if, and there's talk of the English teams getting a 5th Champions League place. Why not throw open a Champions League place for the FA Cup winners? I mean, where would you stand on that, Joe?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary, to be honest. I think it's a real shame that we have to get into that type of debate for people to believe that there's a value in the FA Cup. And really, I think it's just another argument for, I think that's an argument that is far easier to prosecute for the teams of the clubs that think they should be in the Champions League every year, and what another avenue to try and get into it, really, because it's a type of debate that takes place when your starting point for that debate has to be that you don't think there's any value in winning the FA Cup as it stands. And I think that for a lot of clubs, Everton included, there is a huge amount of value. And I think for fan bases in particular, this is, unfortunately, it's moving towards a game for accountants and billionaires. We know that anyway, both in the stands and in the boardrooms, of course. But really, football has to be about journeys. It has to be about success and winning trophies. No one's going to remember a season. It's wrong if you're remembering seasons for 4th place finishes over silverware. And I don't think that, I think that the winning a trophy, or the potential to win a trophy, and the esteem and the joy that will bring should be enough of an incentive, because there are only so many trophies every season, and there are so few clubs that win them. But you can't be telling me right now that there aren't supporters of teams like, Forest, like Brighton, like Bournemouth, even the likes of Villa, and Fulham would be in there as well. Those kind of mid-table Premier League sides, some of them are obviously doing better this season. But all of a sudden, looking at the way that draw's opened, and they're thinking this could actually be, there are a lot of sides in there now that can beat anybody on their day, and no longer have the prospect of facing maybe a Chelsea or a Liverpool, who on their day are just better than them.
Yeah.
So there is someone that's going to... There are a couple of clubs that are going to have some real fun this season, I think, in the FA Cup.
Yeah.
And one or two of them might get all the way to Wembley, and one of them might even win it. And why are we supporting football if it's not about that and the journey that we can go on with our friends and our family and our team and our club on that route? I don't think it needs Champions League to make it special. I think that's just an excuse from those who focus on the Champions League as the be-all and end-all, is trying to find another reason to, say, oh, it's irrelevant because it doesn't offer us enough money or enough privilege, in accessing. The Europa League, it gives you access into that, and that is obviously a route into the Champions League as well. It's a good stepping stone. And again, that's valuable for clubs that don't always get there, including Everton. So... as I say, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's a sad indictment as to where the game has got to. That's part of the conversation, unfortunately.
Well, I've argued for a long time now. Unfortunately, only Liverpool and Manchester United have won major silverware in more decades than Everton, 9 separate decades, but we've given that it's the longest trophy drought in Everton's history, and unfortunately they're not in a position to challenge for Premier League titles at the moment, anywhere near that. That if at least aspiring to winning trophies isn't part of Everton's aspirations. You know, what is the raison d'etre of a club of Everton's size and stature. So that's my take on it. But I'd be actually all for that Champions League one. But moving on to the game itself, Danny Church, a comment from him says the first 45 minutes very poor, a lot better in the second half. Alcaraz looking good. Felt sorry for Tarks. He's been a workhorse this season.
Yeah, agree with all of that, to be honest. First 45 minutes, I think, was the worst of Moyes since Moyes' return.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really poor showing. It was a shame because obviously there's so much momentum going into the game off the back of the Premier League form, and also with what the fans had put together. And it just went flat very quickly on the pitch, I think, and it was a shame. Look, Bournemouth are a side that, as I said earlier, quite well suited. Anthony Iraola's clearly got this Everton side figured out, hasn't he? You know, and he didn't for the first 87 minutes at Goodison earlier on in the season, but obviously, you know, he found a breakthrough in that game, and then although it was only 1-0 when we went down to the Vitality just over a month ago, it was a 1-0 that was, like I said to Sean Dyche after the game when he tried to suggest it was close, I said it was a 1-0 that was closer to a 3 or 4-0 than a 1 each, because it was.
It wasn't comfortable viewing for us and the Evertonians, was it?
No. So, you know, but yeah, I've seen Tarkowski get a bit of criticism. He had a stinker. Like, there's no two ways about it. He had a really, really poor game. But I think that, you know, even the best players have stinkers every now and then. You know, he's someone that since he came to the club has been a bit of a talisman. You know, he's been an ever-present at the back, and whilst they've been disappointing seasons, he's been key to the strong defence that has ultimately helped keep Everton in the Premier League over the course of those years. Everyone's due a bad game. You had the Super Bowl last night, and you had Patrick Mahomes, one of the greatest to ever played at quarterbacks to ever played a game, and he had a stinker. And
okay, these are just words for me, Joe.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that just happens wherever you want. And you know, like last night with Mahomes, again, it wasn't all on Tarkowski. I think that Everton under Moyes, it's clear that they're trying to play out the back a lot more. And we saw that used to brilliant effect against Leicester when the first two assists came from long balls from Pickford and Tarkowski.
Yeah.
But I think that what Bournemouth did very, very well was they suffocated Everton going forward. They closed off the easy routes for Tarkowski, likes of Tarkowski, to try and hit. And they just pressed him. And they pressed Everton. It was almost like they wanted Tarkowski to get the ball because they knew that the extra second that would take split second it would take for him to work out his second best option because his plan A wasn't there. Yeah. Well, that was all the time that you needed someone like Jefferson or Antoine Semenyo to get on him. And once he's under pressure, it's a different ball game. You know, he can play that quarterback role from a passer perspective quite well when he's got time and he's got runners. If you take away time and the runners, then all of a sudden he becomes a centre back having to do work magic with a ball. He's obviously not capable of that. And as a result of that, he was constantly hustled, constantly harried, and made wrong decisions as a result. Penalty. Everton had warnings before the penalty.
Yeah.
Jefferson had a good chance really, really early doors, but whilst there might have been an argument to say that it was offside in the build-up to the penalty, the decision itself, it was a no-brainer. There was no. We were having this debate, I think, in the early stages when it was still 0-0, but with no VAR, you would think that would favour the home side a little bit more, because you'd think that a referee might be even more reluctant to make a difficult decision against them without the safety net of VAR to check it.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was no risk, I don't think, for John Brooks in pointing to the penalty spot after that. It was, Tarkowski got himself into the wrong position and went to ground too easily, and it was a clumsy challenge.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of comments coming through on this. I mean, Nash EFC said, I would have rested Tarky. Been playing through an injury at the start of the season. I mean, I suppose we can all say that in retrospect, but that's one of the great things about Tarkowski, to be fair, is he's always available. As Joe has mentioned, hasn't missed a Premier League game since he came to the club, but what's that, 2.5 years or more now? And I think, I mentioned in my... Obviously, I do the player ratings, and I gave him a 4, and a lot of people said I was generous there, but he's the sort of player I'm hoping, he always fronts up when those difficult moments, when we're looking for somebody to speak to post-match, he'd be there. He was the one who I spoke to in the Stamford Bridge tunnel after the 6-0 at Chelsea. That's the thing about James Tarkowski, he doesn't hide, and I'm fully expecting him to come out and hopefully have a great display in the derby. But Charlie Brown says O'Brien will soon have his position. Well, interesting one. I think obviously Jake O'Brien done well playing out of position those first 3 games. But he's another one. It was tough. It was a test for him on Saturday.
It was a test for all of them, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it doesn't help when you've got Tarkowski as skittish as he was alongside him. And it doesn't help, Lindstrom had a quiet game. The centre midfield were just generally pretty poor. Everton just couldn't get the ball. Once they realised that they didn't have the long ball open to them, and, in having Betto makes it even harder because he's not a type of player that can necessarily, bring the ball down and link up players going forward. He needs to be able to run behind defences, doesn't he? And if that option's taken away from him, then, Everton were going short into the middle. And the amount of times they lost the ball 30 yards from their own goal. I mean, it was the story of the first 45 minutes. They just couldn't get out, could they? And there were a lot of people that were culpable for that, I think. So, Lindstrom had a quiet game. I can understand where people are coming in terms of resting players, but I think that for all the... Moyes and his staff have been urging caution after 3 consecutive wins and saying that, this is still a season that's going to be a battle for Everton. Whilst I agree with that, I do think that those wins had opened up enough of a gap for Everton to take this game seriously. We spoke already at length about how nice a run in the FA Cup would have been, how much it could have meant to Everton. Had they lost to Leicester and it was 3 points, a 3-point gap to the trouble at the bottom, then, it might have been a different story, or even had they drawn it. But the fact that they won it and won it so emphatically and nobody else took advantage of, or nobody else kind of kept pace with them in the bottom few last weekend. Obviously, Wolves beat Villa, but Ipswich had that terrible loss against Southampton. I do think that Everton created the space to take on this game and play a relatively strong side. Obviously, the other issue they've got right now is they have a lot of injuries, so there isn't that much depth. And I think that I think this is a game that Patterson was probably going to start in had he been fit. Yeah. Now, that may well have been more in the Lindstrom role as a kind of a right wing back in front of O'Brien.
Okay.
But it might have been at right back, and O'Brien might have shifted across if he'd have been there, and if Mikalenko had been there on the opposite side. But once you take your specialist fullbacks out of the game, and Everton didn't have any, again, it was... with Coleman out, Patterson out, Mikalenko out, it was all on Ashley Young over on the left then, and which is obviously an issue we'll probably talk about going into the derby. I think it became increasingly difficult to make those changes, and I think that one of the things that's made Moyes' return so far so enjoyable is the fact that he clearly gets the club and the fan base and everything, and I think that. For all that it was a shame, the way that match unfolded, I think had he gone out there and made 3 or 4 changes and put out a second-string side, then I think had Everton then gone out in those circumstances, it'd be even harder to take because it would be a little bit more akin to, maybe Lampard losing at Bournemouth in the League Cup a couple of years ago and what was the beginning of the end for him. Where you look at it and you think that was a missed opportunity. I don't think Everton can... Whilst you can look on Saturday as a missed opportunity, I don't think you can say that Everton didn't do everything they could do to take advantage. They took it seriously. They just weren't good enough on the day. Yeah, weren't good enough, and we'll come to that second half. Also weren't lucky enough when they did pick up their pick up their performance.
Yeah, we're talking about that second half. Obviously, Charlie Alcaraz impressed. We've got a comment here from Tazul Islam. Says, would you start Alcaraz instead of Doucouré against Liverpool? I would start Alcaraz, but I think Moyes will go with a safe option and start Doucouré.
Yeah, probably start Doucouré as well, given the fact that Garner's still coming back from injury, given the fact that there's a temptation there to maybe Moyes' sides have been more successful than Dyche's side because they've shown more attacking intent. But I'd be a little bit worried about going a bit more gung-ho against this Liverpool side. I think this is a type of game where you almost, and again, especially when we don't know what the situation is going to be at fullback. I think you play it safe at the start and you try and build your way into the game and see where it takes you. And I think Doucouré is an industrious option, isn't he? Alongside Idrissa Gueye and Garner, they'll have to do a lot of work. And if I was to give Alcaraz a game, I'd maybe... I think it might still be a little bit early. I like Alcaraz, and I think I like the look and what I've heard. I haven't watched a huge amount of him, but he's clearly up for it, and he's got a little bit of magic about him, and I think he's got a little bit of bite about him. You see some of the incidents that he's been involved in some cases triggered elsewhere in his career, and I thought that I'd have brought Alcaraz earlier in that game, I think, at the weekend, just because Everton just needed a spark from somewhere, and even if that was a little bit of snidiness or something like that just got the crowd going, then it could have been a catalyst for an earlier attempt at a comeback. But I think in the Everton of next season, then maybe Alcaraz, when Moyes had a bit more of a chance to kind of build a midfield and a defence that he's happy with, then at that point you have a bit more license to start him. But I think at the minute I'd still be a little bit too cautious, and that might be too cautious from me, but I think I probably would, just to start the derby with. At the minute, what Everton don't have is they don't have much coming from the bench because they have such a small squad that's even weaker because of injuries. And I think what you do have in Alcaraz, if Everton are 0-0, if they're 1-0 down, if they need a bit of spark or a bit of life, him coming on will lift the crowd and potentially off. Even if Liverpool are just outplaying and overwhelming Everton, bringing on a personality, a character like Alcaraz might be an alternative route back into the game for Everton if they need it, or if they're winning and they've got something to hold on to, might come up and be a good distraction for Liverpool, wind them up a bit.
Yeah, it was encouraging debut, wasn't it? The cameo and Dye had the header off the line 3 times, hit the post there, including Alcaraz's free kick, which he'd won himself. O'Brien missed from close range, and then Jack Harrison with the cross shot. So they were knocking on the door, but obviously Bournemouth kept him at arm's length. But like you say, he just had that bit of energy about him. He was trying to make something happen, wasn't he?
He was, and it lifted Everton. I think Jack Harrison came alongside him, and look, Jack Harrison's having a very difficult season. We know that. But I thought he made a positive impression. There was 15 minutes after the pair of them came on where it looked like they might make something happen, and Harrison put quite a few good balls into the box, which we know he can do, but felt it stood out even more given how poor the balls into the box, particularly from set pieces, were for the first hour of that game the other day. Everton, Bournemouth deserved to win that game, but Everton were unlucky not to get a foothold back into it, I think, during that quite frenetic 10 minutes, three against the woodwork, one off the line. Had a goal, had one of them gone in, then it could have been a different game. And I think Everton were unlucky not to get that chance. The flip side, Bournemouth had a few opportunities as well when they went forward in the second half. But I know we're clutching at straws a little bit, but I thought you could take a positive from the introduction of Alcaraz, the introduction of Harrison, and the fact that Everton didn't just lie down in that second half. They did cause a good Bournemouth side some real problems. They were unlucky not to get a route back into the game, and Lady Luck didn't quite, whether they deserved it or not, it's one thing, but they didn't get any luck. So
and as you mentioned, quite a few Everton players. It was a tough day at the office, but particularly Betto, who'd been so emphatic just 7 days earlier that he's feeding on that service, whether it's James Tarkowski's through ball or James Garner's, to get the 2 goals against Leicester City. He didn't really have much of a sniff against Bournemouth. He had that one chance, mentioned it in the moments, missed there, and he took a swipe of it in. David Moyes just shook his head. There's a few things happened, to be fair, in that sequence of play. It wasn't just Betto.
No. We all want Betto to do well, don't we obviously do. And I think he still could do well, but I think that we'll have to expect some games that unfold like this. We know that he's raw and his skill set is... when games are going to be open and there's defences that he can run in behind, in those he is an agent of chaos, and in those chaotic games, that's when it suits him best, and it's up to him to then take the chances that he will get in those games. He did that against Leicester. The problem will be in those games against better, more organised sides like Bournemouth, where it's not all on him, but he probably doesn't quite have the breadth and attributes, and he doesn't have the creativity of the players around him to be able to cut open or force their way through Bournemouth like that. So, I think we will see performances like that where essentially he just struggles. And I think the challenge for Moyes, I think over the next 6 weeks or so, will be to try and work out what the plan B is. When you come up against a side, when you come up against a well-organised side, maybe those mid-table or bottom end of the European places, if it's not working after 60 minutes, what is your plan B when you can't turn to Breuer, Calvert-Lewin, Chimiti? What do you do then? And is that Ndiaye up top? Is it Alcaraz up top? Is it one of them? Is it moving out Ndiaye into the middle or having Alcaraz there? He has attacking midfield options there that can give him a plan B. I think he's very quickly got to try and work out what his answer is if it's not working for Betto, because there will be games where it doesn't work for Betto. I think where Betto should be judged is not on how he does in every single game, but it's when those games like Leicester come around, can he take advantage? I think that's what we have to judge Betto on, and his success this season. He's not magically going to become a 15-goal a season Premier League striker, but can he score the goals that matters in the games that matter? That's where we'll work out what value he'll have for Everton going forward, I think. But again, I did my Royal Blue column on this on Saturday, and it's been a factor of most people's discussions and thoughts, I think, over the last few days. Certainly since last Monday, the transfer window passed, so I get a striker in. One thing that he probably will never be able to say now is he didn't get a chance. It is in his hands now, so we'll have to keep our fingers crossed it works out for him and for Everton.
Definitely. Just a nice piece just before we move on. And Andoni Iraola, I know it's obviously easy to be magnanimous when you've beaten Everton 3 times this season, but he was asked, we were both in the room at the time, at the post-match press conference about his thoughts on Goodison Park, and he said some really nice things, and about the new stadium as well.
That's what I almost thought was more interesting. It's easy for people to come and talk about how it's easy for people to come and talk about the positives of a stadium they've just spent the day in. Goodison deserves all the praise it gets, but it's easy to speak well of it. What I found really interesting with Iraola was how well he spoke of the new stadium, which suggests he's actually taken an interest in it, which is interesting.
Yes, as a rival manager.
He knew that he knew that it was going to be steep-sided and claustrophobic and intimate, and that was part of the design, and I thought that was really interesting that he knew that. It's his own history at Goodison's interesting, because obviously we talk about the disappointments that he's inflicted upon Everton this season at Goodison, but last season, I think it was it October when
he
just before the international break, and that felt like such a make or break game. Bournemouth and Everton had both had difficult starts to the season. Everton hadn't won at home that season. Bournemouth hadn't won at all. And there was an element of the conversation around that time where it felt like if Iraola or Dyche was to lose going into the international break that was to follow, you'd have real questions over whether or not they'd survive that game. Mm-hmm. And if you remember, Everton won that game really comfortably, and they kind of, made Iraola's attempts to play his style of football and imprint that style of football on that Bournemouth side look quite foolish, because Everton pressed them well and forced them into problems, and it felt like boys against men. And since then, the trajectory of the two sides, Everton have had more of the same. Yeah. And Bournemouth's has been turbocharged, and it feels like that was the nadir for Iraola, and he's done incredibly well to build upon that.
Yeah. Just a couple of contrasting views coming through here. Charlie Brown says, Dyche ruined a lot of these players. Don't know if Moyes can fix them all. But Kunal Desai says, still plenty to play for. 14 league games. Push further up the table. I think 11 or 12 places is realistic and possible. So a bit of optimism after that.
Yeah, I mean, the sides that are above Everton have all got better squads, haven't they? The likes of Man United, Spurs, West Ham. Palace less so, and they're in a bit better form. But those sides that feel like the chaotic ones, don't they now? Each of those sides is dealing with a lot of problems. Obviously, West Ham having appointed Potter are hoping to come through theirs, but Spurs remain in a mess, and Manchester United remain in a mess as well. So, there's a chance. Of course, there is. Everton need to carry on, finding good results and build on what they've done. I think that Everton were best served by still focusing on what's beneath them. Trying to maintain and increase that gap and seeing where it takes them in a couple of weeks' time. Yeah. But there were opportunities against sides in that little bracket above them. Obviously, we know we've got Liverpool at the weekend, but then it's Palace, who would be one of those sides I think he would intend to chase down. Mm-hmm. Man United come quite soon after. Brentford are in that pot as well. Those are the type of games which, again, a well-drilled Everton side under Moyes with a little bit of luck, you think could pick up some good results. The incentive is there because the quicker Everton can move up the table and look like they're going to stay up, the quicker and more attention they can place on the summer reset that is clearly needed at that football club. The more time they have to prepare for that, the better. And of course, whilst we don't really think that PSR is going to be much of an issue going from July the 1st, obviously the higher up the table you get, the more money you get, the easier it is to spend it. So all of those will have an impact. So I definitely think that I definitely think it's possible for Everton to have a decent finish of the season. How far up the table they can go, I'm not entirely sure. I think, as I say, it's got to be more about how many points they can put between Leicester, Ipswich, Southampton, and maybe Wolves, rather than how many teams above them they can move above. We can't get ahead of ourselves. I think Saturday was a bit of a remark, as I say, I don't think that it was tempting to say that Moyes learnt a lot during that first 45 minutes, but given everything that he said since he came into the club, I don't actually think he necessarily learned anything, because I actually think he knew all that about. Okay. I think he knows the limitations of those players, and it came to he didn't need them to come to the fore in the way that they did the other day. I think he already knew that, and that's perhaps why. Both the messages he's been saying publicly and, when we speak to him and speak to his, those around them, in private, I think they're very, very keen to maintain the focus is the Premier League, and that is the be all and end all. So, I think they're wise to do that, but hopefully by taking that seriously and taking that threat seriously, they actually get to a point where they move away from it quicker, and then we can start focusing, on having a bit of fun for the rest of the season.
Yeah, just before we move on to those final thoughts, Roy Nixon has responded saying, hopefully Iriola's putting himself forward for the job. I think maybe one for a few years down the line there. David Moyes obviously been brought back to use his vast experience and the way, as Joe's mentioned, knowing the club to usher them safely through to the new stadium. But yeah, he's definitely, as I think Gav mentioned in the podcast last week, showing how football can be played in a post-Pep age.
Yeah, and also showing how you can build something from a low base and do it quickly.
Yeah,
which is what he managed to do at Bournemouth. They have spent money. I did a piece on Friday around the transfer windows of Farewell. We spoke about it on Friday, and I think that. It's about £150 million worth of difference in what Bournemouth has spent compared to Everton over the last 3 or 4 years. So that has to be the asterisk, that all the criticism of Everton that we put their way. When you compare them to somewhere like Bournemouth, you have to look at the financials and the context in which their progress is sat in comparison as they've moved away from Everton. But on the flip side, again. Everton have spent money on likes of Neil. When they have had money, they spent likes on Neil Mopay. Betto was a buy now, pay later. But when you look at some of the players that Bournemouth have brought in, even before Areola, I think Clive was about 10 million. I think Semenya wasn't that much more. Similar fees. If we take the conditions of the deals out of it, similar fees to what we're being paid for like a Mopay. So it does show that if you are savvy in the transfer market, you might have a bit more chance to kind of find a few gems that Everton might have missed out on.
Yeah, I think just finally, this is a post-Bournemouth podcast, but Vitaly Mikalenko missed out. Moyes said that was a calf injury, but as things stand, you got the prospect of Ashley Young, who's not far off his 40th birthday, coming up head-to-head against Mo Salah. But it's an interesting one, how that one transpires as we get to Wednesday night.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Just writing something on this now as well. Everton's gamble on their fullbacks. It was in the summer, Everton were quite active in the transfer window, and I think that we could all see that there was an obvious issue at fullback. But the belief was that, constrained by PSR and having had a very good defence last season, it was the backbone of a campaign that would have led to a mid-table finish without the points deductions. The obvious place to spend what money that could be spent was on going forward, and that's essentially what they did. I think we can understand the reasons for that, but essentially they decided, no, we're not going to look for a fullback because they thought they had cover. You got Coleman, you got Patterson, you got Ashley Young, you got Mikalenko, and you got James Garner, and all of those were part of the thought process. Obviously, they'd sold Ben Godfrey, and they would later go on to loan out Mason Holgate. But it was a gamble in the summer because we know that Coleman and Patterson have historic injury issues, and we know that Mikalenko had it started in the derby win against April, then he came off midway through that game, and that started a run where he was repeatedly being rushed back mainly for the Euros for Ukraine. He repeatedly coming back when he didn't look 100% fit, and then picking up new niggles as a result of that. So very, very quickly, the risk got exposed, didn't it? If you remember when Ashley Young went and got sent off in the first game of the season against Brighton, and you end up with Roman Dixon, against Spurs for the following game. No, look, Everton kind of came through that period, and again, going into, whilst you would say they had a lot of issues going into this January, the one thing that you would say is the defence had probably sorted itself out. They had those positive draws against Arsenal, against City, against Chelsea. They kept clean sheets throughout November and December, and places like West Ham and and in the home game against Wolves, albeit Wolves had a lot of chances in those games. And they've effectively now, the two different managers came to the same conclusion that fullback wasn't the area where, if they had some money, it needed to be spent. And that was the case on, Moyes thinks the same. Moyes is aware that they need to improve. I think everybody knows that now in the summer they're going to have to overhaul their fullbacks. They're going to have to look at that situation properly. But there was again a belief that even going into probably going into the last 10 days of the transfer window, there was a belief that fullback they would be okay, and they had other priorities. And I know that they were mentioned in relation to Ben Chilwell at Chelsea, and while he went to Palace on the last day of the deadline of the transfer window, he'd been ruled out by Everton. Even when they were in talks with Chelsea of potentially sending Royer back and bringing somebody else in, even 10 days before the end of the transfer window, they'd worked out that they weren't going to pursue Ben Chilwell, and actually it was going to be, if that deal was to unfold, and we know it didn't, it was going to be someone like Chukwuemeka or Dewsbury Hall, someone further forward that was going to help them. Then you had Brighton, and Oro Mangala got injured for the rest of the season, ruled out for the rest of the season, and what happened to Calvert-Lewin happened as well. So that only intensified what was already the approach, was they think they had enough to get through him. Problem is that it just leaves themselves exposed, and we're in a position where already so soon after the closure of the transfer window, you're looking at the fullback situation. Coleman has a calf issue. When I asked about that on Friday, I was told a week or two, so probably looks a little bit too early for Coleman. Wednesday does. Patterson has a little hamstring issue. They don't think it's serious, but again, Moyes was saying probably not for the weekend, for midweek. Mikalenko is obviously touch and go now, so they're sweating on Mikalenko. Mikalenko is double-edged. So obviously, one, you want him to be playing because he's part of your first choice side, but two, whilst he has had a bit of a roller coaster of an Everton time, he does tend to do pretty well against Salah. He was excellent in the derby win in April. He was very good in the game at Anfield. That left side, him, Branthwaite and McNeil were brilliant against Liverpool for that first, well, pretty much for the whole game.
It's when he went off, didn't he? And then that's when the problem.
But at Anfield,
switch,
at Anfield they were very, very good at. Liverpool didn't look like scoring until they got the penalty in that game, and they played a good chunk of that against 10 men of Everton because Ashley Young had been sent off in that one as well. So Mikalenko tends to do pretty well against Saka and Salah. So it'd be a shame if he can't make it. So then you're in a situation where you're looking at Ashley Young again. He's not getting any younger. We know he's versatile. James Garner, because of the injury to Mangala, really is needed in the middle of the midfield. So you can't start looking at him as one option out wide. Now Moyes has kind of already stumbled across a workaround with Jake O'Brien and what he's done with him and Lindstrom. So the right side is probably going to be okay, but very, very quickly you're looking at that side and you're thinking, in terms of players that you'd be content to play in fullback, you're left with Ashley Young, and he had a very, very good back end of 2024, but we've seen, whether it be Brighton, whether it be at Anfield, even at the weekend, he can have difficult games in that position. It's not an ideal one for Everton to be in.
Can't even move McNeil back there either at the moment. So, we'll continue the build up to that huge game. Obviously, it'll be the David Moyes pre-match press conference tomorrow, and then obviously they get the game itself on Wednesday. Just just to finish on, I've had a nice comment coming in from Danny Church. He says, got to say, love the Stubbsy podcast. His honesty on his health issues and the love he has for our club was nice to hear. Yeah, so, we said at the time, Alan Stubbs, the latest guest on Goodison Park, my home, spoke really candidly about matters on and off the pitch. So that one's available to watch as well. So I've been your host, Chris Beesley, been joined by Joe Thomas. This has been the Royal Blue Podcast.